Today we will be discussing for a very robust and engaging conversation around how we can work together to make our neighborhood safe. It's my distinct honor and assignment to introduce my boss. And so if I don't do this correctly, I may be flying back to some of y'all hometown. But it is an honor to introduce Mayor Emanuel. If you don't know him, I'm not sure where you've been. He has distinguished himself as the Chief of Staff to the President of the United States. A part of his resume is serving as a senior advisor to President Clinton. He served as a congressman on the north side of Chicago and has, while he's been here these 3 years, been burning up the streets of our city, making changes and building a new Chicago. If you would, make me feel at home and say, building a new Chicago. Building a new Chicago. That's what this mayor's been doing. And so what I want you to do is put your hands together and show some appreciation for the mayor of our great city, Mayor Emanuel. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Vance. There must be something connected to bringing people from Virginia and all parts of the country, and the sun is out. So I want to thank you, since I think a number of us in the Midwest can say to Mother Nature, we hear ya, enough already. This has been a long and tiring winter. I do want to thank Gene Williams. I want to thank Police Superintendent Dixon, the head of Noble. Thank you for being here. I do want to thank you for bringing the entire Noble Conference here to the city of Chicago. Gene's been talking to me a great deal about it, and I'm excited that it's here and welcome you back in years to come. And I also want to say I'm excited also about what's going on in the other room. Because while this is important, and this will be important, there's a whole nother youth conference going on in the other room. And everything we're doing in this room is only as relevant as the kids in that room know that they're front and center with us. Not just because they can think about a career in law enforcement, not just because they think of something in criminal justice, although that's all positive. I want them to have just a positive thought that they have a future. Now, everything we're trying to do, and I don't want to run through statistics later in this conference, they will do that. Because it is not about statistics. It is a bit about strategy, and it is a bit about tactics we adopt, and those are all important. But it's about having a comprehensive strategy so our children and our families know that regardless of where they live, regardless of what neighborhood they're from, and regardless of what's happening in that neighborhood, they have the peace of mind that a child can walk to school thinking of their studies, not their safety. A parent can have the peace of mind that their kids can be out on the front stoop or out in the neighborhood and play without the fear of violence. Now, some of what we've tried to do here in Chicago seems straightforward. It's really adopting something I worked on when I worked for President Clinton as his senior advisor in the crime bill. It's about putting more police on the street and getting kids, guns, and drugs off the street. Every piece of what we are trying to do and implement follows that basic 4 set of principles. Now, we have adopted a couple things on policing. The superintendent, the first deputy, will go through that in the whole conference, what we also try to do with our schools. But every strategy we have done is about putting police on the street, not just in quantity, but doing it in a more strategic sense. But I do want you to know, while I'm excited about our numbers, and I said that, the progress we're making. The thing I'm most excited about, and J.D. will also speak about it, is while we've seen an overall reduction of 25% in shootings in the city, teenagers and adolescents, a 40% reduction. And what is complementary to everything we're doing on policing, we increased our after-school funding by 26% in the city of Chicago. Our summer jobs, 150%. Even while the federal government cut back by 90%. Last year, the city of Chicago had the largest class of kids involved in summer jobs since the war on poverty, 20,000. This coming summer, which seems long away given the winter, it's going up to 22,000. Building community gardens. doing other activities, learning bike mechanics and all other activities, but 20,000 kids throughout the city of Chicago had a job, a paycheck, a place to go, a mentor that was involved. And I do not want anybody ever to walk away from one of these forums or other forums that think crime fighting is the work that goes on just in this building here. I'm proud of what our men and women in uniform do every day. I'm proud of their hard work. But I also want you to know what goes on in our schools, our places of worship, our park district, and all our activities that we do and invest in when it relates to what is called prevention has a dramatic impact of giving kids a right choice to make. Second, we've also done what I call what we wrap around. Not only is it policing, not only is it prevention, but it is also parenting. And we all know, whether it's schools, whether it's public safety, our work is easier if there are parents teaching kids right from wrong. And one of the first things I did when I was mayor was strengthen our curfew laws and strengthen the enforcement of the police department in enforcing our curfew laws. Now, a number of us in this room grew up when the lights were on outside. That was your signal. And then there was somebody on the front stoop yelling at you, and they weren't a parent, but you had to get inside. So all of us grew up with some form, and we have strengthened our curfew laws, and we've strengthened our enforcement. And lastly, I got to be honest, and I think I'm speaking, I hope I'm speaking to the converted, but if I'm not, I'm about to. The weak link in this process is our gun laws and the penalties associated with our gun laws. And it's not just about having tougher penalties, but it's targeting the most violent offenders who are wreaking havoc on our streets, regardless of what city you're from, and you're from all parts of the country. The police, the after-school programs, the parenting will be as strong as the weakest link. And all of us should work, whether it's in our state legislature, but no doubt with our national government, in having a comprehensive background check. I stood by the side of President Clinton passing both the Brady bill as the point person in the White House and the assault weapon ban. It has been a long time since, and we can't walk away from, no matter how hard the politics is, from the ability to get that type of progress done. So I want to thank you for being here. Proud of what we are doing here in Chicago. We have a lot to learn. We'll talk about, everyone up here on the panel will talk about things that we have adopted or doing in the city. But I think there are things that I think are important to do, important to share. Most importantly, isn't the program, isn't this initiative, but it's the young men and women in the other room who have to be the focus of our work so they have a decent childhood, so they can grow up knowing that they have a future, and they have a future in whatever city you're from, that they can see an exciting city and they can look at that city, and if we do what we're supposed to do, they can see their future with that excitement rather than a different future that's in front of them. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for your remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, again, on behalf of Noble, let me thank you for your presence. We have a distinguished group of Black law enforcement, Noble National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives who are here from around the country. Thank you for your presence and for what you do even in your own town to make America and make your city safer places. We have a distinguished group of community activists and CAPS volunteers and people who are aggressively working to make their neighborhoods and their blocks safe. We want to thank you for your presence. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very august body of panelists who in their own right are a part of this discussion, as you are, as the mayor mentioned, in making sure that our kids, our neighborhoods are safe places. And so what I want them to do, starting here with Mr. Aziz, is to identify themselves and just give us a little snapshot about what you do.
Mic's on? All right, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Malik Aziz. I'm from the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I'm the national chairman for the National Exodus Council, which is a group of formerly incarcerated convicted professionals across the United States. We're located in 24 cities, and each person that is affiliated with their nonprofit organization or organization that works in the community with around the issues of reentry and gang prevention and intervention, or some are formerly gang members, and some, and mostly everybody has a college degree and have served time in the state system or the federal system and been out 10 years or better.
Thank you.
Pastor Chris Harris, pastor of Bright Star Church of God in Christ, right here in the Bronzeville community, and also the founder and CEO of Bright Star Community Outreach, where we do a plethora of things such as youth violence, anti-violence programs. We're also a safe passage vendor with CPS. We have a family advocacy center through DCFS, and we also are the founders of the Bronzeville Family Festival, where it was a church picnic that grew from 300 to over 8,000 that attend on the first Saturday in August, where we give away free laptops, school supplies, book bags, health immunizations, and so many other things, and make sure we put that under the banner of anti-violence and community unity.
Terry Hilliard, retired Superintendent, Chicago Police Department.
That was quick. Jadine Chow, good afternoon, everyone. I am the Chief Safety and Security Officer for Chicago Public Schools. We have over 400,000 students. We're the third largest district in the country. We've spent our last 2 years really focused on combination of prevention and intervention strategies. We partner very closely with our community-based partners, our faith-based partners, Chicago Police, and our parents. We're very proud of the results, as the mayor mentioned. We've seen shootings go down of our CPS students of over 40%. Inside of our schools, we're working to do preventative activities to reduce arrests. Our arrests are down year-to-date over 27%. This combination of strategies, which I'm hoping we'll get to talk about a little later.
L. Weisinger, First Deputy Superintendent, Chicago Police Department. I'm tasked with overseeing the daily operations of the department. Good evening and welcome to our host city, Chicago.
Anita Alvarez, Cook County State's Attorney. If you don't know, if you're not here from Chicago, Cook County, the office encompasses not just the cases that come out of the city of Chicago, but the entire county of Cook. We are the second largest prosecutor's office in the nation. We have over 1,500 employees, over 850 attorneys. So the majority of our cases come from the city of Chicago. We also have another 120 municipalities in cases that we handle. So we have our main office here in the city, and we have 5 suburban offices. So it's a very large office, but I'm proud to be here. I've been a friend of Noble and Gene Williams for many, many years. And I'm proud to be a partner with CPD, and we work together each and every day in the field, so to speak, in the trenches. So I'm proud to be here today.
Good afternoon. I'm Garry McCarthy. I'm the police superintendent here in the great city of Chicago. I'd like to welcome and thank you all for being here, in particular Chief Dixon on behalf of Noble. You couldn't pick a better place. Although Motorola is a great sponsor, thank God we got you out of Schaumburg and into Chi-Town. I really anticipate that we're going to have a great conversation here tonight, but I'd be remiss if I didn't give a special shout out to my former colleague and friend from New York City, Assistant Chief Jerry Nelson. Jerry, you should have called me before you came. There are a couple of things you could have picked up for me on the way out. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Hello, my name is Denise Reed. I am the parent, the mother of a 14-year-old honor roll student that was killed in March 2006. My daughter, Sarkeisha Reed, was looking out of her window getting ready for school when a stray bullet from an AK-47 assault weapon shot and killed her. Since that time, I have been working with CAPS, the police, the state, with helping our youth to survive, giving them greater purpose for living and letting them understand why they are here. I'm one of the founders of Purpose Over Pain, which is a group of parents that formulated because we all lost children innocently due to gun violence. So I appreciate the invite and looking forward to the discussion on today.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Terry Mason. I am the Chief Operating Officer for the Cook County Department of Public Health, formerly the Commissioner of Health for the City of Chicago.
Right. Thank you so much. Let's give our panelists a warm introduction. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Mr. Philip Hampton. Philip, if you'd stand. Philip is the Chief of Family and Community Engagement for the Chicago Public Schools. Phil, thanks for being here. It's now my honor to ask Chief John Dixon to come, who is the national president of Noble, for remarks. And then following that will be the illustrious, one of the brightest, most beautiful anchors in television in Chicago, and that is Robin Robinson.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, let me thank the panel for serving. I know, you guys got a lot of things on your plate, and this is such an important issue and near and dear to our hearts across the country, our children and the safety of our children. So I want to thank you all for coming in. And I'll tell you what's really important, that we have such a diverse group. None of us can do this alone. None of us can discuss this alone. It's going to take, everybody, every part. It's going to take the schools. It's going to take the police. It's going to take mental health. It's going to take everybody, to do this together. And that's the only way we're really going to come up with some good, strong solutions. And on behalf of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, we thank all of you for being here, because as a community, this room should be full. It should be packed, because this is such an important issue to all of us across the country, the safety and the well-being of our children. So when you go back, after you get all of this good information, please take it back to your neighbors, knock on their doors and say, hey, you missed a good one. You missed an opportunity to help turn not only, look at Chicago, but the entire country around. So, make sure you do that. With that said, on behalf of Noble, thank you all. We're really glad to be here. It was a little cold at first, and the weather's gotten a little better, as the mayor said, so thank you again.
Thank you, Chief. Am I on? Can you all hear me when I don't stand there? They invited me so it wouldn't look like an inside job. So you'd have somebody from the main media here to really grill your panel. It's a great panel, great turnout. I'm happy to be here moderating something about safety in our neighborhoods that is not coming in the wake of some heinous event. So let's give it up for people who work on this all the time, not just because let something horrible happen. I remember like it was yesterday, your daughter's tragic story, Starkeisha Reed. When Hadia Pendleton was killed, we had international media just kind of coming down on Chicago like it was the worst place in the world, because the worst thing in the world had happened. But each thing that happens to anybody's family is the worst thing in the world. We talk about crime statistics, and crime is down, and all you have to have is one person that you love affected by crime, and it seems like crime is everywhere. So to deal with it from an individual basis, how we can make every place safe. There are, as we know, a few zip codes in the city where it's not down, where those people, they don't care what it looks like overall. Chicago has this reputation, which is not fully deserved. I've been looking. We love lists. In the media, I'm for those of you who are from out of town, I act like you all know me already. You probably don't. I've been a long time news reporter here in Chicago for about 30 years, and we love lists in the media. It's the 10 most this, the 10 most that, the 10 most dangerous, and they're not reliable. You can only do it based on statistics, and really you're on the ground. You know what's really happening in these communities, and we really appreciate this opportunity to have a back and forth. So it is back and forth between you and the panel, but as you've seen from the instructions up here, if you have questions you'd like to ask, please put them on a card. Hold the card up, and a representative will get it, and we will, because we've done a lot of these, and we find that sometimes the questions may overlap or questions turn into statements, and we want to really keep it going, because we're not just going to cover strictly law enforcement issues. It's multi-layered, which is what I found in my coverage. We love to go and put the mic in the superintendent's face and say, how did this happen? When in fact, it's not just a police issue. They just end up being the ones that get the bad news first, and so they are, of course, the target of all of our questions. With that said, the mayor talked about curfew, and kids coming in the house when the lights go on, or people tell them to get in the house. But if things are going on in that house that make it actually worse than what's going on outside, and it's actually perpetuating their behavior outside, because there are mental health issues at play here, which is what people do worry about as well with the concealed carry. The first people you call when you think somebody's crazy in your neighborhood is the police. But are you all trained psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health workers? So that is a huge piece of it. And we have a person who has a lot of experience in this. Dr. Terry Mason, who's a longtime friend of mine, has been in the trenches. There was a lot of upheaval, Dr. Mason, over the closing of many community health clinics. And you've said that they had become a crutch. I remember we had this conversation, and that people need to really practice their mental health treatment, and not just say, I'm just going to keep going to this center every day. How closely related are mental health issues to the problem of safety in our communities?
Well, Robin, let me just say that beyond those mental health issues that are diagnosable, there are those people who don't have diagnosed mental health issues that are creating and causing crime. And many of those things happen because of the environment that many of those people live where they live every single day.
Does poverty lead to mental health issues?
Sorry?
Is poverty a factor in mental health? Am I more likely to have mental health issues if I am deprived of basic needs?
Poverty is an amplifier for almost any kind of problem. However, there are many people in the United States that have diagnosable mental illnesses that are not poor. So it is, and many of us grow up in poverty who don't have any issues at all. So though it is related, it is not necessarily causal.
Are services available, particularly if you're in an area that is deprived of many other things?
Well, mental illness in America should be ashamed of itself in the way that it has treated the mentally ill and the level of funding that has been available for the mentally ill. We have not, even though there have been parity laws passed that say that treatment for mental illness should be pursued just like treatment for heart disease, yet that has not happened here in America. We've come a long way, but we still have a very long way to go. And we need to make certain that people stop separating everything above the neck from everything below the neck. It all works together, and I'm sure the law enforcement people here will let you know that many of the times that people have issues, behavior becomes erratic and creates other kinds of problems. But we have a lot of people who create other issues for people who have no diagnosable mental illness. And that's what we, at least not yet, and that's what we need to focus on.
Superintendent McCarthy, how worried are officers on the streets about the mental state of the communities that they're working in?
Well, I don't know how to answer how worried we are, because it's going to be an individual, but I could tell you that it's something that affects us greatly. You know, you take a mentally ill person and you put an AK-47 in their hand, and we've got a problem. I think some of the issues that revolve around poverty, education, breakup of the family unit, and I don't want to get into the doctor's world, just like I'm sure you don't want to get into mine. But there's an intersection between public health and public safety that's really being recognized today in this country, and is an opportunity for us to actually start changing the discussion. Because if you put the dots on the map and you look at where robberies happen, like we do at Comstock, or shootings or burglaries, and then you put the dots on the map as far as mental health issues, poverty, you know, where is government money going for funded services? They're the same exact locations. So the intersection of crime and public health is something that we really have to start taking a much closer look at, because the things that we do to reduce crime happen outside the realm of what the doctor would be doing. And perhaps the doctor can cure what's happening before we get involved. So there's an opportunity here. And I know I didn't answer your question, because I don't know how much we worry about it.
How much you deal with it.
We're certainly aware of it. Let's put it that way.
Deputy Weisinger, what do on a day-to-day operational basis, what resources do your officers have if they come across a situation that they think there is a mental health issue involved?
Fortunately, we're at the forefront when it comes to crisis intervention training. We're a police department of about 12,500, and to date we have a little over 5,000 officers that are trained. So when they do happen to run across persons that may be suffering from mental illness, they have the ability to look and observe and see some of the signs that will indicate that this person is not just an aggressive person or a violent person, but this person may be suffering from mental illness. And we've equipped them with the tools on how to deal with people who suffer from mental illness. So I think it goes back to being trained how to identify them in the first place.
And then you can send them where? Where do they go?
Well,
Roger Hospital? What do you?
We work with a couple of local agencies. Hargrove Hospital is one of them. We do have other social service agencies that we can refer them to, and we try to put them into these places to get them some help to keep them out of our lockups.
Ms. Chow, it would seem that you have a captive audience there with your 400,000 students in public schools. That's where a lot of children actually get their first idea of a medical evaluation is there in school. Is there an increased focus on trying to address the mental health issues, not just of the student, but perhaps that may go through the family?
Yeah, and teachers and neighbors. It's a situation that impacts all of us. I mean, we're very fortunate. Over the last couple of years, we've been able to really extend our partnerships. CPS can't do it by ourselves. There's no way we could possibly have enough resources to handle the need. So as Deputy Weisinger just mentioned, we also have a great partnership with Hartgrove. We have trained clinicians who are present to identify situations. We're looking for suicidal and homicidal ideation that's taking place so we can prevent incidents before they happen. We're partnering with our community-based organizations who have relationships with families and with students. So if someone knows something's happening in the home life, we can share that information with the teachers inside of the school and the principals so that we can hopefully get in front of it and provide the wraparound support, wraparound services that the child needs.
I began with mental health issues because Dr. Mason does have to leave us a little early, and I'm trying to give just 10 minutes to 5 or 6 subjects here. We can come back to this. Does anyone else on the panel want to comment on that, how prevalent they think the mental health situation plays into the safety in our neighborhood? Anybody else?
Well, absolutely. I think one of the unfortunate things is the church has not been as active as it relates to dealing with the mental health thing. I can speak as a pastor. Some things, we always say, cast the devil out, pray, and all of that. But there's some people that really need to be talked to. But unfortunately, when you think about mental health, when there's a tragedy that happens in the community, one of the first people that the people call is the pastor, is the church. And why do our people not go to clinical psychologists and things like that? 4 reasons. Number 1, they don't know them. Number 2, they don't trust them. Number 3, they don't believe they can afford them. And the 4th issue is the biggest issue, is nobody wants to say or think that they're crazy. But the church can be on the front lines, and faith leaders have already built that level of trust. And if we identify, train, and certify faith leaders to do this kind of counseling on the front line, at least it becomes a portal that will lead some of our people to the clinical psychologists who can then do some of the back work.
Now, we know that almost the reason that Noble exists is because certain crimes and certain types of violence seem to be much more prevalent in African American and Hispanic communities than in other communities. And it has been said that because of the violence that goes on in those communities, it's arguable that many of the people there are suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. If you live someplace where bullets flying is a normal thing, that you develop a certain mindset that is different from those of us who feel safe in our communities. Does anybody see that getting better or being addressed at all? A community-wide kind of feeling of not being safe? Well, that's something that's...
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, our people live under the threat of trauma and violence. I mean, just look at the fact that we're honored to be able to serve, to do safe passage, but it's almost offensive that we have to put grandmothers and mothers and gentlemen on the street just so that our kids can feel safe going to school. So, of course, PTSD is a big issue, but it is something that has not had the great opportunity to have robust discussion around it because we don't really want to talk about that, and we need to inform our people.
Okay, thank you very much. And now Vance is going to hit another subject.
Pastor Harris, thank you so much. That's a wonderful segue. I had a question, and I want to just commend Philip and Jadine, and in her absence, the superintendent of the Chicago Public Schools, because she does an extraordinary job. They do an extraordinary job with the 450,000 children that are part of the system. And the mayor mentioned earlier today that there is progress moving from 50% graduation rate to soon seeing 80%. Mm-hmm. But notwithstanding that, can you comment, if you can, on the connection between student performance, crime, and violence?
Again, this room doesn't need me to say, if a child is so worried for their safety that they're afraid to come to school, their attendance plummets, or if they're so concerned for their safety during the day that they're going to get beat up on their way home, they can't focus on their classwork. And so one of the things that CPS is trying to do is provide interventions. And so I'm not sure how familiar you are. We have Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Tier 3 being the highest level wraparound services and interventions. When children are identified as needing those supports, we find a way. Again, resources are extremely tight, as I'm sure it is at all of your cities, but we find a way to partner with the people we can partner with to get these children those services. As a result, our attendance is up. Our infractions are down, misconducts inside of the school, because we're learning how to de-escalate situations. We're training all of our staff, including the teachers, including the security officers, so that kids can focus on the classwork.
Absolutely. While you have the mic, you want to comment about how safe our schools are?
Sounds like a loaded question. I mean, I would say this, we're making a lot of progress. We are the third largest district in the country, as I mentioned. If you ask our students, we have improved. As I said, our arrests are down, our incidents are down, but we won't be satisfied until they go down to the point where children can all say, I feel safe. How we're doing that is partnering with our friends at Chicago Police Department. Every morning, we have a conference call with CPD to talk about the incidents that happened the day before or over the weekend. With that information, we're both able to strategize and identify what we need to do to make sure our kids get the response they need, not just while they're at school, but in the evening. And so we're talking all night, 24/7, to make sure that our kids can be safe. The kids feel that, and they understand that adults are trying to keep them safe.
Absolutely.
I'd like to comment.
State's Attorney.
Jaden, you probably know better than I, but there was, several years ago, there was a horrible beating of a student outside of Fenger High School, and it made national news.
Darren Albert.
Right, Darren Albert. But the principal of Fenger, and I'm blanking as to her name now,
Liz Dozier.
has really turned it around.
Liz Dozier.
She's done an excellent job, and I know that they have some programs there where they do peer juries, and so there's a lot that's happening inside of that school, and we see it from less cases that we're getting from that school. So clearly, what's happening at Fenger is a good thing, and I'm hoping that other schools kind of model what she's been doing there.
Can I talk about that really quickly? So what Anita Alvarez is referring to is restorative justice. Where we look at consequences that are more instructional versus punitive. What we do know, and we know this nationally, if I just suspend a kid for 10 days, what have they learned? They go home, they get angry, or they hang out on the streets, or ironically, they hang out at the school. A lot of the kids who are suspended end up just like hanging around the perimeter of school. They're not doing anything constructive. And so one of the things, and Liz Dozier that you referenced is one of our models across the district. She's created in-school suspensions. It's not a new concept. But instead of sending you home where you're just going to be left to your own will, we'll have you sit in a room to do in-school, what she calls personal development. It's ISPD, in-school personal development, where you'll actually start your morning with a peace circle, where you'll talk about and reflect on what you did wrong and how that impacted the other person. Then you'll write essays, then you'll do your homework, then you'll have lunch, and you'll end the day with another peace circle. So that's the kind of model that we're looking to expand to all of our schools.
Sure. Chief Dixon, thank you for your insight. Chief made it very clear to us that it takes all of our involvement. And I wanted to know if anybody could talk about evidence-based, community-based programs that actually help student performance and achievement.
I wanted to make a comment prior to you going to that next area. In regards to the community and them feeling safe with the schools, I'm a mother that raised 9 children in Inglewood, and we have 6 sons, 3 daughters. And of
I think
course,
that's worth us pausing and giving you a hand.
That wasn't, thank you, but that wasn't the purpose of me saying it. The purpose of me saying it is that we raised 6 sons in Inglewood, which is a community that has a reputation of being very violent, very volatile. But one of the things we had in our favor was sports. All of my children, sons, my daughters also were involved in sports, ROTC. At church, we were involved with Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Boys to Men. These kinds of programs helped me and my husband raise our children so that when the gangs were prevalent in the community, the sports programs kept them involved. The coaches, I even had to beg them, can I have my sons on holidays, because they kept them so involved. And so we commend the public schools for keeping those programs, because it made a difference in our lives. If we could have afforded to put them in private school, we would have done so. But with the means that we had, the public school was really great with keeping them engaged. None of them were in gangs, none of them, you know, so that's the reason me making note of that, that it really made a difference for us in that community. And if parents get involved in the communities, we can make it safe. The safe passageway signs are helpful, that people see them out there, but parents, we have to get involved. We have to stand out, and we have to make a safe passage route for our children getting from point A to point B, because it's very scary for them. I talk to children all the time in the high schools, and some of them walk down the middle of the street to feel like they're safe just going from school to the bus stop to their communities. And so we as adults, we have to make sure that our youth know that along with the police, the school, CAPS, etc., that it's safe for them and that they can come to us and feel like they have some type of support with whatever they're having to deal with.
Excellent, excellent. Pastor Harris, Mr. Aziz, do you want to comment about effective evidence-based programs that help with student performance?
One of the things that we did in the city of Philadelphia, and I had a lot to do with it under the administration of John Street, the second African-American mayor in Philadelphia, was we developed a program called Safe Schools, Safe Arrival, Safe Departure, and we utilized the, it was a lot, you know how people just hang around, just stand around, even though you would figure that you wouldn't want them to stand around the school, but still you got to realize that there's a lot of stuff going on around the school, that you have stores, you have bars, all kinds of stuff. Now, I'm not saying we're going to put nobody drunk out there to help the school, but we engage those people because what I found out, and I was the program director for Safe Schools, Safe Arrival as well, Safe Schools Make Safer Communities. Actually, while incarcerated, I devised those programs when John Street was the city council president for 7 years. I used to mail him stuff out when I was in Greater Fort State Prison about how to how to engage the community. So what one thing, the children in the community that go to these schools, they know the people that's on those corners. So once we engaged them to show a civic responsibility that the children get to school safely and a civic responsibility that the children get home safely. So we were able to give them some kind of training, a stipend. We put a vest on them, and we had them the eyes and ears of the school perimeter. And also, we came up also with reality checks. Reality checks is that, see, everybody can't go into school and talk to the students. So what we did, we found people that was able to do that the young people respected. And they were able to, like the young lady said down there about working with the children for peace, talk about peace in the morning, peace at lunchtime, and peace after school. Well, we was able to do the same thing. We called a reality check, and it was a good tool to find out exactly what's going on in the community when they're not in school. Because a lot of stuff starts in the community and comes into school.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you, Mr.
those are evidence-based things that work.
Okay, Mr. Harris.
One of the things I like about evidence-based is everybody has a program, but everything is not necessarily bringing progress. And I always tell people, and I get in trouble with some of my constituents when I say 8-track methods in an iPad generation can be counterproductive. And I think as a pastor, when you bring resources to the faith institutions, I think there ought to be accountability with the responsibility. If there are no results, there should be no resources. We all realize that data always comes before dollars. And I think we have to hold each other accountable. But if you're going to do that, make sure you build the capacity of the organizations and the institutions that want to do the boots on the ground work. If the church does not have the capacity, if the FBO or the CBO does not have the capacity, bring them the resources so that they can do it. And then the other side, don't always give the resources and the empowerment to the good old boys clubs. There are some great new innovative ideas that will work if you would take the time to pour into them and partner with them.
Okay, thank you. Ladies.
Well, thank you.
The Fanger High School story is intriguing because they used the resources of communities that weren't even in that area, because so many people became interested in what was happening with those children. And every school doesn't have that disadvantage of having had something horrible happen that brings resources. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have been given to Fanger High School. Our budgets, our municipal budgets, really don't allow for the type of wraparound services that we all agree that the students need. Higher attendance brings higher federal compensation, which is not to say that that's the only reason that we want children in school, but it certainly is a factor when budgeting for CPS. Truancy oftentimes is driven by the children. There are, I work in a couple of schools in our city in mentoring programs, and if, I'll ask, well, are you coming to that program? Should I ask your mom? You don't have to ask my mom. If I want to come, I'll come. Just like if I want to come to school, I'll come. And if I don't, then so what? I'm not. Principals say the same thing. The kids are driving their own attendance. How then do you address truancy? Children who just don't come to school for many weeks out of the school year. I guess, Jadine Chow, that would be for you.
I'll start, and maybe either superintendent or First Deputy might want to chime in. I mean, it really takes, it takes all of us. I mean, it used to be, and we still do a little bit of this, there was a thing called truancy officers. You send truancy officers out, and they knock on, students' house doors when they don't arrive to school. You drag them in. They come in. You haven't solved the root issue. What happens? They just sneak right back out. And so you haven't solved the root issue. Many children don't come to school because they're scared, because they're afraid to walk to school, like the mom was saying down there. Many of them are behind in classroom, and so they don't keep up, they're not as engaged. So for all those different reasons, we have a brand new department of attendance and truancy at CPS that's focused on identifying and really segmenting those different categories of children and trying to provide the right support depending on the need. Those solutions will include a partnership with CPD. They will include a partnership with the faith-based organization, the reach and partnership with the parents. All of these strategies are being reviewed right now to revamp what was there. And so it's not fully ready to go yet, but we're getting there. In the meantime, we're working with the schools to identify mentoring programs where we have either community-based organizations or in-school mentors who will actually reach out, build those relationships with the students so that on a one-by-one basis they can help get to the root cause.
Superintendent McCarthy, when does truancy become not just a school problem but a crime?
Well, I wanted to add something else before I go there, since Jadine so kindly volunteered me. But I'm never at a loss for words, so it's fine. I want to talk about truancy and curfew in the same vein. And what Principal Dozier is doing at Fenger is exactly the same concept, which is, the police pick up truants because they're not in school. We return them to a school where the teacher doesn't want them in the classroom because they're disrupting the class. That's the whole reason that this whole suspension policy came about in the first place. So if you think about that for a second, just hold on to that thought. Now talk about curfew violation. We catch little Johnny on the street at 1 o'clock in the morning. And what do? We return little Johnny to a house where we don't know if there's an alcoholic father and a prostitute mom. We don't know what the issues are. Why isn't little Johnny home, and why isn't little Johnny at school? So why is it that as a society, and I'm going to give you the answer to the question before I finish it, lawyers, why is it that in a society that cares about our children the way we do, we can't come up with some sort of a holistic approach to this problem where we don't just return Johnny into an environment at home that he might be running away from in the first place? Why don't we find out why little Johnny isn't home and get him services? So rather than returning him home, we take him to a catchment center where there's somebody there to work with him, to do some sort of mentoring, to identify parents to come in and start figuring out what's going on here. Same thing with why isn't little Johnny in school? I already answered the question. Lawyers and liability. That's where we're struggling right now. I'm not letting go of this issue, and at some point, we're going to come up with something along those lines. We're doing something right now with Hargrove Hospital that is successful as far as curfew violations go. When kids aren't home for like the third time they get picked up for a curfew violation, there's a program at Hargrove Hospital where that's where we bring the kids. They get services. They work with the family to figure out what's going on. We're not fixing a problem by running on the hamster wheel. We're just continuing it.
Well, seems like we need to take pay a visit to Hargrove Hospital. They've been mentioned several times here. And you talk about lawyers and the legalities. You can't force people to get mental health services or social services.
And liability.
But if little Johnny is kind of on his own and can go to school every day if he chooses to, what's going on at school that's not compelling him to? You work in the community. What do you think is the number one driver of truancy, Pastor Harris?
One of the first things, the number one driver of truancy is a lack of, let me say it like this. I think our kids lack point of reference. So I'm a son of the soil, born in the projects, 2930 South Dearborn. And one of the first things that I tell kids when we created our TEAM initiative, TEAM, Truancy Education and Mentoring, one of the first things that I do when they come in there, we say, no, if you get suspended from school, we don't want you to go to the police. We want the police to bring the kids to our church. But we have to make sure that the facility is something that they would want to be in. And when they come with all of the excuses, well, my daddy did this, I tell them mine did too. Well, my daddy didn't claim me, mine didn't either. Well, I was raised up on aid, I know what government cheese is like. And so when we have, a point of reference of where they are, we're relative, we stay relevant, then what we do is we have to expand their point of reference. Most of the kids have never been downtown. Most of the kids have never been anywhere, but we need to make sure that we help them to understand there are other options. I guarantee you, if we become relative to them and relevant as adults and help them to understand we know where you are, we've been there, done that, then we build trust and we give them some options, I promise you, they would choose it every single time. But here is the key. The kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you can do all the talking you want to, but until you spend time with them, it's not going to work. No method will ever work.
That's why you always have to have a pastor on your panel. All right, so you can have one phrase you can take home.
Got to have a preacher.
Terry Hilliard, does this sound like the same old problems not having improved and if in fact maybe getting worse? I mean, truancy is certainly not new. Are our solutions new enough? Are you sitting here saying, wow, we haven't...
The one thing, Jadine and I are on an advisory board. Is this working?
Yeah, you just got to lean it up.
Jadine and I are on an advisory board for, they raise an inordinate amount of money that they're getting ready to give out to the different groups across the city. And Isaiah Thomas is on that board, and one of the things that Isaiah was talking about is exactly what the superintendent talked about. We got all type of initiatives and programs and mentoring and counseling programs for the kids. And we bring them in there and keep them in there for an hour, 2 hours, and then we send them back to that dysfunctional home. Mm-hmm. With them dysfunctional parents, and we got to say it.
That's right.
You got to call a spade a spade. Simple as that. And that's one of the reasons that little Johnny does not want to go to school. Right. Does not really want to go home, and he want to hang out with the boys and girls on the street. What are we going to do about those parents at home?
And there are those who have argued that while we blame the parents at home who are not doing what they're supposed to do, it's because they've been failed when they were little Johnny's age. Dr. Mason, I'd like you to address the generational issues and why we sometimes need to intervene and become the parents that these parents apparently are unable to be.
Robin, as I was sitting here thinking, I grew up in Inglewood too. I grew up there in the late 50s, early 60s. And there were many of the same problems that families had then that we see today. But the difference was growing up in Inglewood there, if there was problems going on in my house, I could go next door, or Mrs. Goss would call me down to her house. Mm-hmm. And we would, they would work with the parents. Right now we've got a program for this and a program for that, and all of it will never substitute for just good old-fashioned parenting in the neighborhood. And I make this point very quickly. One of the other things that helped me a lot was a man from a place called Meridian, Mississippi, who was the man that owned the grocery store on the corner. And everywhere I went, I saw people that looked like me that owned the businesses that I went to. Yes, they owned the tavern, they owned the grocery store, the record shop, the TV repair place, the cleaners, everywhere I went. Right. And so Judge Pincham said, you can't be what you can't see.
Talk, sir.
So the problem that we have, rather than try and make this a laboratory classroom exercise, is that the questions that we need to ask have to do with what happened to those communities. Why isn't it today that many people who live in black communities go into places and they don't see somebody that looks like them.
That's right.
That's in business. So why would I aspire to go into business? Because I don't see it being possible for me. Why is it when we look at, and I deal with people with all kinds of chronic illnesses, and I'm going to take this license. Diabetes is not necessarily a genetic problem. It is not. It runs in families because the same bad habits run in families.
That's right.
So the issues that we have are what I call diseases of malnutrition. Malnutrition spiritually, malnutrition physically,
Talk, man.
and malnutrition mentally. That our people are not being fed the kinds of things they need to be fed that will awaken in them those things that will be transformative in their life, and they don't see anyone else that helps them make that so. And I just want to just show that for those who like data, you asked about this, there's an article published in the British Journal of Psychiatry that looked at providing supplementation, just simple essential fatty acids and things that would normally come out of collard greens and things that we would normally eat. But they found that there was, in a prison population, almost a 30% reduction in disruptive behavior once you begin to address, and I'm just talking now, the physical problems of malnutrition. So if we look at diabetes today, we see an explosion of something that we never saw before. When I was in school, I never saw I went to a school with 600 students in a grammar school class, and if there were 5 fat ones, that was 5 more than I'd ever seen. That's not the case today. So the point I'm trying to make is that if we are not going to be serious about trying to restore an environment where children can grow up in healthy homes, then we could throw money at it, we can throw police at it, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't. But until we look at the real root causes and understand that the policies that were put in place in the 50s for public aid and driving the man out of the home, all of those things now we are paying the price for them.
And the only beneficiary of being the manufacturer of Flamin' Hots. So, because I deal with that. If they are eating it on the way to school, they're eating it. I don't want to get Frito-Lay, consume me if they want to. But so it goes deeper than what we may say. We talk about these dysfunctional families as if somehow there was a choice. We appreciate your comments. We're going to get to some nitty-gritty for the last couple of subjects. And Vance, it's the worst of it.
When Mrs. Reed introduced herself, she talked about losing her daughter due to the hands of a AK-47. The Chicago Police Department, Superintendent, if I'm correct, recovers annually more guns than New York and LA combined. I saw a pamphlet out that the NRA had was distributing in the community with the, and we also have State Representative Esther Golar, so I know she understands this down in Springfield. But they had a pamphlet out, and it said that there are enough guns in America for everybody in every family to have one. And so one of the things we have to talk honestly about is the accessibility to guns. And I wanted to know if, Superintendent, if you and Al could talk a little bit about some of the things that you're attempting to do to try to address that, to be sure, and also the state's attorney on the prosecution side. But let's talk a little bit about the accessibility to guns. Is there anything that we need to know that you're doing, just so we know that with concealed carry coming, that you guys are, out recovering the guns?
I'm going to ask. I'm going to start, and I'm going to lead, and I want you guys to hear from Al to follow up on this, because this is becoming doctrine in the Chicago Police Department. We are only part of a system, right? And modern policing, as you all know, in law enforcement, is about systems management. We run our departments like businesses, like we never did before. And the criminal justice system in the state of Illinois is not designed to reduce gun violence. Now, there's a lot of influences on that system. There's police, obviously. There's prosecutors. There's sheriffs. There's prison systems. There's defense attorneys. There's judges. There's a lot of moving parts in that system. But at its baseline, now, Jerry Nelson, my buddy, is here from New York City. And at the end of the day, I speak about this frequently. Great policemen in New York City. I'm sorry, I'm going to be politically correct. Great police officers in New York City. And great police officers here in Chicago. And last year, we recovered 9 guns for every one that New York City recovered. They're not 9 times better than the New York City Police Department. There's that many more guns here. And they're here for a number of reasons, and it can be prevented. There's 5 key components in the law that can prevent it from happening. Now, I know I'm talking about something that's outside the scope of policing, but this is a failed system when there's too many guns coming in and not enough punishment going out. So what happens is we're drinking from a fire hose, and we will continue to take more guns off the street than any police department in the country every single year because of the fortitude and the hard work of these men and women, but supported by the fact that we're drinking from a fire hose. There's 5 components in the law that if they change will reduce gun violence. They all exist in New York State. So people need to look at this. The first 2 I'm going to put together. Assault weapons, extended magazines. I do not hear a debate in this country about whether or not you should be able to buy a hand grenade over the counter at Walmart. The Second Amendment says right to bear arms. Well, why can't you buy a tank or a bazooka? Because it's not practical. An assault weapon was created to kill somebody in combat. It's not created for squirrel hunting. There's no reason for those 2 individual things to exist side by side in our society. The third thing, universal background checks. They're designed to keep terrorists, criminals, and mentally ill people from obtaining guns. Yet in Washington, D.C., just a few months ago, we saw a criminal who happened to be insane commit a terrorist act with 2 firearms that he bought within 2 weeks of each other right across the river in Virginia. I'm sorry about that, Chief. Right across the river in Virginia. So that's 3. Number 4, in the state of Illinois, there is no requirement to report the loss, theft, or transfer of a firearm. You own something called a firearm. Look at Jerry Nelson's face. He's like, what? You get something called a firearm owner's identification card, and you can walk into any gun shop in the state of Illinois and buy as many guns as you like with 0 accountability to what happens to those firearms when you walk out the door. So the gun gets purchased legally and illegally transferred into the hands of a criminal. The last one is a little bit controversial, especially in the African American community, but it's something we need to talk about. I have not yet spoken to the parent of a dead gangbanger who would not rather that their child was incarcerated rather than interned. It has not happened, folks, because it doesn't exist. At the end of the day, a significant mandatory minimum for carrying a firearm needs to be implemented in the state of Illinois because they are not learning not to carry the guns. In New York State, there is a 3-year mandatory minimum for carrying a firearm. And you know what's happening? This is the issue that's being lost on people. In New York State, they did something called repealing the Rockefeller drug laws. And they were called the draconian Rockefeller drug laws, which alleviated some of the pressure on the system, and they increased the penalties for gun possession. And at the same time, here's what's happening in New York. Gun crimes are going down, homicides are going down, gun seizures are going down, and incarceration rates are going down all at the same time.
Superintendent, I just in all fairness, I want to mention that that's somewhat controversial. There are people who say that that's criminalizing.
I just said that.
Right. So
I said that too, Vance.
Can we get some reaction in terms of?
Let me address that
Okay.
first, though. Criminalizing carrying a gun. It's the gateway crime to committing a murder. Let's be serious. Let's be serious. You know, right after Sandy, by the way, concealed carry, the first victim of Sandy Hook was a legal gun owner. Murder number 2 in the city of Chicago this year was committed with a gun that was legally possessed by somebody who didn't safeguard it, and it was stolen in a burglary 2 nights before. The fact is, there has to be some sort of reasonability here. The week after Sandy Hook, there was a man in Shanghai, China, who went on a rampage, and he stabbed 44 people with a sword. Not one of them died. Give that man an AK-47 and an extended magazine, and you tell me how that's going to turn out. So, Vance, there's a way to do this, but we have to confront it, and we have to speak honestly about it.
Thanks,
Sorry, I'm very, very emotional about this,
Well,
because I'm tired of meeting people like Denise, and I'm tired of walking through shell casings at crime scenes and people defending it.
First Deputy, did you have a comment?
Just to piggyback on what the superintendent said, I think we do have some relatively lax laws here, because in the city of Chicago, there's not one gun store that you can actually purchase a weapon from. So how is it year in and year out, we still lead the country in recovering weapons? Not one gun store in the city of Chicago. So we need to tighten some of these loopholes. Again, it's a touchy subject when you talk about mandatory minimums, and we were actually able to get Noble National Chapter to sign up on a letter on a House bill that we were trying to get passed down in Springfield. Didn't get a chance to get it before the committee, and it did not make it out of the House, but that does not mean that we're not going to continue to try, because, again, you know, we look at the faces of the mothers that are sitting on the panel here and the mothers that are sitting out in the audience, that hearts never stop aching because their children are not coming back.
Absolutely.
So we can sit here and debate this as much as we want to and talk about offending people. We don't want the bill written so you lock everybody up. We want to lock the people up that are pulling the triggers, that are causing all this pain. And as soon as we can tweak that law to ensure that the right people are being put in jail for the right crimes, I think we'll be a lot better off.
Very good. If you want to, yeah, absolutely. Follow up to that. So clearly the Chicago Police Department is doing a tremendous job in terms of gun recoveries, leading the country. Is there anything that the community can do? Are there still opportunities for public action? State's Attorney.
Well, I'd like to actually talk about what Gary and Al just mentioned as far as our gun laws. I wholeheartedly agree with the superintendent about we need a change in our gun laws, because we see the cases each and every day. And, you know, I'm the elected state's attorney, but I've spent my entire career as a prosecutor, over 25 years here in the state's attorney's office. I have listened and I have held the hand of mothers who have lost their only child as a result of gang violence, misidentification, little children being killed. You know, it's a tough job. And each and every day we see these cases coming in. Everybody wants to kind of skirt around this issue, particularly down in Springfield. But it's so important when we looked at the other jurisdictions, including New York and other jurisdictions, to see what their gun laws are. And we look at ours here in Chicago, you know, here in Cook County, here in the state of Illinois, and what do we see? We see the bottom line on a gun case being a year. Well, we all know a year isn't a year. A year is automatically 6 months,
right.
And it's less than 6 months. It's 3 months, it's 4 months, and that's what you're getting. So what do you see? These guys out on the street, they get a gun, they're in for 4 months, they're out. And they're back out on the street, and what do? They possess more guns. And we see this over and over and over again. And, you know, we can talk about, you know, the argument in Springfield is always, well, the cost. But I think we ignore the real cost of crime. It's the real cost of crime. What happens to these families? What happens to the victims? What happens to that child who's paralyzed as a result of that gunshot?
Right.
And think about the cost to society in the medical field to care for this child. What we've done this past year, as the superintendent talked about last session, we pushed to get our minimums up to 3 years. It did, as Al said, it did not get out. A committee, it didn't pass down in Springfield. You know, I've been down there and gotten beaten up by the NRA It's kind of, it seems like a, you know, whenever I go down there, I come back with a headache, you know, when I go down to Springfield. But the important thing is I think we need to really look and understand. And it's like Al said, we're not talking about, you know, taking guns away from rightful owners who, you know, we're not talking, you know, Chicago is the urban center of Illinois, much different from the farmers down at the southern part of the state. You know, are they out there shooting people with guns? No. Do they have a valid FOID? They probably do. But we're talking about the guys on the street who don't have that valid FOID card, those gangbangers who are out there committing these crimes. In 2009, and I think this is important to understand what we're up against sometimes, in 2009, we put forth a piece of legislation to make it a non-probational offense for a known gang member who's found on the street with a loaded weapon. We put that through in the regular legislative session. Did not pass. And that was one of the times I got beat up by the NRA guy. And then in June of 2009, Chicago police officer Alejandro Valadez was responding to a call, shots fired in Englewood. He was responding to a call, shots fired, and he was fired upon, and he was killed. That was in June of 2009. I reintroduced that bill in the veto session, and guess what? It passed. And so we now call it the Valadez Law. It's important to know the history of it because part of me thinks it took the killing of a Chicago police officer before anybody heard what we were saying.
Right.
So in 2009, the Valadez Law was passed, and each and every year we see an increase. The last number I had for 2013, we have 108 cases pending, and this makes it a non-probational offense for a known gang member to be on the street with a loaded weapon. And what the other thing, curiously, that we noticed from the Valadez cases is that these defendants are not going to trial. They're pleading guilty, okay? So they're taking the minimum amount of time on the Valadez Law, which is what we see as a great success. I agree that we need to strengthen our gun laws. It has to be that way because we're seeing each and every day way too many kids, good kids, you know, intelligent kids that have a future. They're ending up, as Gary said, in a grave as opposed to up on a panel like we are here today. And so I think we need to wake up in the state of Illinois. I read an article online just 2 nights ago, and this happened in, I believe it was Arkansas, and I don't know what their gun laws are down there, but it was a group of kids, teenage kids, that threw eggs on a car in front of this house. And it was apparently in retaliation for what the owners of that house's son did. All high school kids, high school pranks. We've all done it. I've seen the toilet paper thrown on people's houses, throwing eggs. Hey, I think I threw a couple of eggs on Halloween when I was a kid. So this man came out of his house and shot up that car of teenagers and killed someone. Now, you know, he probably is a valid gun owner. But my point is, if you got that gun, you're more apt to use it. In a situation like that, there was a child lost because he's mad that somebody egged his car. You know, we have to be responsible if we're going to be gun owners. We have to make sure that we handle those guns correctly. In a situation like that, if he didn't have a gun, I'm sure no one would be dead. So it's just something.
Hey, Vance, I'm sorry. One more fact, and then I promise you I won't say another word because I don't want to hijack the panel. We can point to, I think the number was 159 or 169 separate shootings last year in the city of Chicago that would not have occurred if we had a 3-year mandatory minimum for illegal gun possession, including, I believe it was 32 murders. But the one that everybody knows, and has already been mentioned, is Hydea Pendleton. And I want everybody to know the story behind Hydea Pendleton's death, besides the unbelievable loss that we all suffered. Hydea Pendleton and her friends were huddled to get out of the rain in a park. 2 gangbangers drove past that park and its rival gang territory. One of those 2 gangbangers had been shot in July. We solved the shooting. He would not identify the shooter. The case ended up not getting prosecuted. The reason why that happened is because they wanted to take care of it themselves. The alleged killer got out of the car, went around the block, and opened fire into the crowd. That young man, his name is Michael Ward, this happened in the end of January 2013, was convicted of illegal possession of a firearm in November 2012 and should not have been on the street. And what's the result? Idea Pendleton's death. I'm sorry.
No.
Now I'm going to stop.
Real quick, Superintendent Hilliard, you've sat in the hot seat for 6 years as a superintendent. I want to know if you can give us a little perspective.
Well, what I want to go back to Gary. February the 14th, 1975, 10 p.m. at night, Terry Hilliard shot in left wrist, right elbow by an individual who had shot 5 suburban police officers. He did maybe 3 years, Gary, maybe 3 years. Law hasn't changed since I got shot up until us sitting right here today.
Yeah.
And you listen to these folks talk, yeah, the law needs to change.
Yes,
Let me say this, right? I hear you talking about mandatory minimums and all that. Let me say this to you. See, one thing that we fail to realize, that in our community, if we don't deal with what's going on in our community, then we're going to always have that what they're saying, mandatory. We get hurt with mandatory minimums. We get hurt with our kids getting killed. We get hurt by too many guns in our streets, and we get hurt by too much drugs in our street. But the community is they sit back and just let it happen. One of the proactive things that we need to do is that we know who's selling guns in our community. They're illegal guns. They're not buying them guns legally. There's been people buying the guns and they're giving them to sell it. So that's what you call straw purchase or whatever. But the bottom line is that we keep sitting back and let people do business as usual, and then we have the mishaps that we have, the tragedies that we have in the community. So when we have to be proactive, when we know somebody in the gang. I was in the gang. But look at what I'm saying is that if you don't change the mindset of these guys on these corners, right, you know they come to go to jail, they come back, they go to jail, they come back, and then sooner or later they got a gun back in their hand and they running down the street shooting somebody. All right, you want to have everybody sitting in prison? My good friend Sylvester Johnson, the commissioner of Philadelphia Police Department, told me that you cannot arrest your way out of a problem. You can't do it, because it's going to have another problem down the other line when you say, well, goddamn, all those black people in jail. Everybody's locked up that's black in jail. And that's what you get now. You got Michelle running around talking about mass incarceration and all that there. But it's coming off of our community. If this is mass incarceration, that means somebody doing mass crime. And that's why they're in prison. But then somebody, I'll be right with you, home. Then somebody will say, listen, somebody will say, well, the law, the Justice Department is not fair to blacks. That's what they'll say. That's why they're all in prison.
So, Mr. Zane, give us some solutions.
The solution is to change the community. That's the solution. You got to change the community. You know these guys coming back in the community. So don't be negative to them. Bring them, involve them in something positive. Like my man right here, the pastor. He'd be glad to have them come to church.
All day long.
All day long.
So Pastor Chris Harris, clearly the superintendent, regretfully, and the police officers see this, and we all see it when there's the yellow tape.
Right.
Unfortunately, you have to encourage parents. You have to sometimes officiate funerals. What more can the community do in terms of these laws?
So one of the things that I think the church can be instrumental in, and the community as a whole, we lack knowledge in civic engagement and policy. My favorite book, the Bible, the people perish for the lack of knowledge. And at the end of the day, you know, when we hear about these subjects, the first thing we hear is Springfield. Who in Springfield? It's not the city that's preventing the proper measures being put in place. So I think if we're really going to know how to do it, why not expose the people who are preventing the proper measures from being put in place? Why don't we have some robust discussion around that? I think we're focusing on the luggage and we're missing the trip. At the end of the day, you know, we really do need to talk about who's preventing those things, because at the end of the day, it's not their kids that are dying. They're not even our color. And then here's another thing. We can't get folks in our community to fight for gun control because they're uneducated about the whole subject. And secondly, now they want one to protect themselves. But if we start to educate them, help with empowering them as it relates to civic engagement and understanding policy, I guarantee you stuff down in Springfield will start to change when a few of us from the projects go down there and demand it.
The last two subjects we might want to do a little combining because we do want to get your questions in, and they are related. We were talking about guns. We're going to talk about gangs. And we've talked about communities and dysfunctional families, and a lot of people see a connection there that these young people are actually looking for a family to replace the one they don't have. I don't know if we're going too deep on that, if it's just, you know, kids who look to make trouble, but how many different gangs are operating in Chicago, and has that gone up, down? I mean, there's the urban myth is, well, 20 years ago they decided they were going to have a war on gangs and arrest all the heads, so they cut off the head of the snake, and now there's 1,000 snakes. That was not a good policy or a good strategy, that instead of being able to find a gang leader, you have to find, you know, a person on every block that is a de facto gang leader. Superintendent McCarthy?
Yeah, so the actual, first of all, I don't know, I think people like to make that a cause of what's happened today. And I love when people talk about the good old days. People have always told me about the early 90s in Chicago, and they tell me, well, it never used to be like this. And I'm like, right, there were twice as many people getting murdered when we had those big 10,000 person gangs. That's what was happening. But at the end of the day, right now, as best our intelligence can tell us, there are 59 separate umbrella gangs. And within those 59 separate umbrella gangs, there's about 630 factions. Now, I just want to make this clear. What that means to me is we got 630 gangs. Because it's not like we're under the same umbrella. No, they shoot each other. And that's the way it works. So the real answer to that question is we should probably forget about that umbrella thing and point out that we have 630 gangs with about 100,000 members.
100,000 members.
Yeah.
I should point out that in the media we do try to refrain from saying a name of a gang ever, but there are certain names that seem to live in infamy and even be glorified to a certain extent. How do you battle that on the street? How do you take the glory or the power away from gang membership for young people?
Well, one thing you do, you want me to answer that? Can I answer that?
Please do.
Well, one thing you do is that you educate, like the pastor said, you got to educate. Listen, I mean, how long gangs been in Chicago? I'm talking about I'm talking about the gang mentality. I'm not just talking about the body. I'm talking about the gang mentality. It's been ever since people came to this country on boats to Ellis Island, to the cities. It's been a gang mentality. So the gang mentality is that you have to educate people to educate themselves to be responsible for other people. So that's one of the things that I was put on probably one of the first gang programs they ever had in Philadelphia with Melvin Floyd, the House of Emoji, David Fatah, Mother Fatah, and a lot of other programs that we went from 200 murders in 1973 to 0 murders in 1974. Now.
Self-done. That was not some program.
Well, it was the mothers. It was the mothers that was losing children. It was community leaders that cared that there was gangs and we was losing our people. And I was one of the first ones to buy into that. Well, why am I out here doing this? So I'm just saying, now 2014, there's still gangs in major cities doing the same thing. But the NEC, and there's two of my friends from Indianapolis in here right now, sitting right there. The one thing we can do is that transformation. When you transform, when you change your mindset, and you respect it, and you're credible, you have credibility, then other people will see that, and then you can. But some people don't buy into that because you're always going to be a gang member. If you was a gang member, you always. If you committed a crime, you're still an ex-convict. You bring those stigmas up, and you don't allow people to make the change for others. There's the change you made for yourself. So that's important. And breaking the gang. Basically. If you would try to, it's not about breaking the gang, because you ain't gonna break the gang. It's about breaking the people in the gang, and show them a better way of living.
Everybody was, Ms.
Yes.
Chow.
I wanted to talk about something a couple things that we're doing inside of the school. So the mayor referenced the summer jobs. I don't know how many people heard the This American Life segment on Harper High School. It was 3 parts long. There was so much to talk about. This is a high school in Englewood that suffered tremendous violence. My first year was CPS. We had a student from one high school shot almost every other week, which is tremendous.
Not necessarily shot at school. but they
Never
were
shot at school, let me be
yes.
really clear. Always shot either off hours, on the weekend, or in the evenings, what have you. That's too much for one community to bear. And so the principal was traumatized. She was just really having a difficult time. Brought us in with CPD, with Family Sports and Services, and with the mayor's office, and with the community leaders in Englewood. Minister Johnny Banks, who's sitting in the audience. We actually brought together the parents and the kids and said, what do we need to do to make this stop? We got summer jobs for 150 of the students in one school. The school only has 500 kids. So we went from a shooting every other week to, once June started, we went 6 months without a shooting. Now, I know that's not a victory to say, oh my gosh, a kid didn't get shot. We recognize that. That's the way it's supposed to be.
That's what's supposed to happen.
But at the same time, that we were able to bring together these different cliques. So we had like 15 different cliques, all in this one program. And we showed them how they were able to get along, and it melted away. Since then, Harper has had, I think, like maybe 1 shooting in the last year since then. So that's one thing we're doing. The other thing we're doing is partnering with Chicago Police on an initiative called the Gang School Safety Team. It's something where every time we have an incident like a shooting, or on a preventative basis, if we suspect that there's going to be something that's going to jump off, we bring the Gang School Safety Team in with my team, and we do preemptive interventions in a very supportive way. We talk to these kids, not to try to de-affiliate them. You're absolutely right. It's very hard to, these are their friends. I mean, this is their group. We don't say you can't be friends with your friends. We're saying let's just, talk about something positive. Let's get you engaged in a job. Let's get you engaged with a mentor. We do these things every single day. It's sustainable because they follow up and they build relationships with these kids. I think that has contributed to the reduction in shootings that we have seen in Chicago.
I'm going to give you a chance, Pastor Harris, but I do want to hear from Ms. Reed. Do you see, what do you see going on in your neighborhood? Because obviously you and your child were victims of gang crossfire. That bullet was not intended for her.
Absolutely, it was not. But what I wanted to say is the Word of God says, through love and kindness have I drawn them. And there is a power that comes from love, the mother's love. And so for the guys in the community that were gangbangers, drug dealers, that were constantly being arrested, taken to jail, coming back, I treated them as if I was a missing mother in their lives. I would invite them to go to church. I would, talk to them about why are they on the streets. And, when you gave them that sense of respect and love, it made some of them leave the gangs. It wasn't me constantly preaching to them every day or telling them they were no good or sending them back to jail, which I'm sure happened and is needed for some of them because some of them were so hardcore that they're in jail to this day. But for some of them, it was just that mother's love that possibly they were not getting at home that made them feel a part of a family, because they would see my family going to the park and we looked like, I'm sure, like...
the Huxtables.
I was going to say Ma and Pa Kettle, but yeah, the Huxtables. Dating myself. But we looked like a beautiful family just loading up, kids in the community, taking them to the park for them to play ball. And it was something as simple as that, a ball, that made them feel like they were a part and they belonged. And so, whereas they did have to go back to their communities where they may have not had a hot cooked meal or something like that, but just for that moment, they felt a part. And so looking at another lifestyle helped them. So it was the love, I think, from a mother. So we moms that are out here, we're hearing the panelists and we're hearing all these wonderful professionals, but we have to make a change every day. What will we do today to make a difference in someone's life? Because we're walking past these young people every day, and we're going to see them tomorrow, and we're going to see them go back and forth to jail. What can we do in their lives, one person at a time?
Pastor Harris.
So couple of things. Number one, education in the schools. If we don't give them access to high quality education, then at the end of the day, they're going to end up in a grave or in a jail cell. Number two, give them some jobs, because if you don't give them an opportunity to make money, they are going to be slinging and banging out there to make their money. And then number three, which I believe is the most important one, she started off with the statement, the Word of God says, this is probably the most faithless generation that I have ever seen. And unfortunately, we have taken the focus off God. There were 4 principles that really helped me to stay safe, even though I was raised up in the same generation, because unfortunately we took faith out, right? And now Kanye West is Jesus. Now Jay-Z is a God, calling himself Hova. So they don't really have a faith. 4 principles kept me alive and helped me. Number one, my mama used to say, boy, the Lord is watching you. So I was afraid of everything that I did. Number 2, she said, you going to hell if you don't change your life. So I was pretty grateful for that. And then number 3, she said what I think more parents need to be able to say, but because of DCFS, they can't say it. I'm going to kick your behind. That's what my mother did. She stayed on top of me. My daddy was not there, but my mama knew how to stay on top of me, and she disciplined me. And then number 4, she partnered with the police system. She said to us, if you commit the crime, you're going to do the time, and I ain't spending a dime to get you out. So my daughter yesterday, my 12-year-old daughter yesterday, the police are right in the room in the 2nd district. My daughter called herself, wanted to hang out with a little friend since her daddy a preacher. She wanted to prove she was normal. So she was bullying another little girl, bumped up against her. What did I do? Left the church, went to the school, picked her up, embarrassed her, and took her to jail. Straight to 2nd district. And I called the 2nd district. I said to them, I need you all to help me to save my child, because it still takes a village to save a child and raise a child. So if we collaborate and partner with them and not fight each other, I believe that we can come together and actually save and change some lives.
Right. Dr. Mason.
I'll make this really, really short. I think one of the most rampant problems that we have is self-hatred.
Yes, sir.
Yep. And many of our people don't know who they are or whose they are. And this is something, a lot of, I think, what we've heard, and we could go through all the research, but we just need to go back to some very basic fundamentals. And I thank you so much for what you said.
What strategy?
Because it was not only just mother's love, but it was mother's tough love.
Yes, sir.
That kept us, and that's what's missing. And lastly, I'll say that business is complicit with this. Because if I am, what do these young people see? They see that the way that they can make themselves, or at least cling on to an illusion of making themselves financially successful, by using the media that denigrates women, that denigrates their community, and teaches them no respect for one another.
I was just going to ask you where that self-hatred comes from.
That's where, I'm not blaming all of it on that, but much of it comes from that. So at the core of it, if I don't care or love me, and I don't have any value for my life, I have absolutely none for yours. And I will act on that principle. So whatever we do, I think that love is a part of it, and us showing that to one another is critical to it. But we have to think about how we bring back, if possible, some of the good old-fashioned values that kept most of us sitting up on this panel here today.
Well, there are probably young people who are in trouble and think they're profiting from it, who would say, well, what did faith get? Where did faith get my mother? It didn't get us anywhere, so I'm gonna go for the fast, easy money, and if I died trying, I might not have been gonna live anyway.
Well, that's cool. Somebody else is telling them that. Just telling them negative stuff that's well known, like the pastor says.
Okay.
And that's what they gravitate to. If you got to meet those Jay-Z's, Kanye West, and them, you got to meet that with a positive message, or even more powerful than their message. And I believe that does work. I believe the pastor has a role in spreading that word to the young people. It has to be greater than what they're saying.
We all have talked about the importance of a summer job, and somebody said, I don't know who it was, that nothing stops a bullet like a job. But a lot of these young people don't want to make $8, $9 an hour. They want to turn to something they think is more lucrative. So for our last subject, the unfortunate industry that seems to have taken over many of our neighborhoods. And just can I say this, everything bad in Chicago that happens doesn't happen in Inglewood, for those of you who are not from here. And it's been mentioned several. I go to Inglewood all the time. I'll be there tomorrow. It is a good community full of good people. It happens to be where some bad things happen. Maybe not even more often than some other communities. I don't want to name them just so Inglewood won't feel alone, but it's not a bad place. You can go there. Kennedy King College is there. Whole Foods is coming. It's not that bad. Okay.
Thank you, Robin, so much. We're going to amend our questions because we're so appreciative of the community who have come, and many of them have been kind enough to write down some questions. So what we want to do in the balance of our time is read some of the questions from the community for our panel. The first question is for Dr. Mason. How will the new gun laws impact the mental health community?
The new gun laws impact the mental health community?
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure I understand how those two things.
Whose question was this?
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Okay, I think that person probably left, but
I don't even want to begin to approach that unless someone else states.
anybody on the panel want to take a stab at that?
Is there a mental health screening with these new gun laws before you can conceal and carry?
I think that's one of, isn't that one of the disqualifiers, that if you have a diagnosed mental health, that you cannot get a FOIA card? Okay, all right. So next question, and this is for Superintendent Hilliard. What strategies would you employ to better improve police-community relations?
You know, I'm just going to say this. I've had my turn. 5.5 years.
What? Smart man.
That was great. Simple as that.
That's how you get to retirement. Superintendent McCarthy, would you like to?
Yeah, Terry retired and he became a bus driver. You know what? I'm going to let Al talk about that because I said I don't want to hijack this.
Yes, sir.
I think it takes a change in the mindset of how we actually do policing. You know, we have to come up with a holistic approach. What I've been hearing from the panel and also from the audience is that this is not just a law enforcement problem.
Let's give a hand to, excuse me, First Deputy, let's give a hand to Dr. Mason. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, First Deputy.
As Mr. Aziz said down there on the end, we cannot arrest our way out of this problem, out of this situation. All we are doing is contributing to the penal system. So what we have to do is come together with the holistic approach and come up with some ideas and some inventions, if you want to say, that will help each and every person sitting at this table to come together and use each other's force multipliers to help some of the things that are troubling our communities. Somewhere along the line, we forgot about being a village, and that was touched on earlier. When I was coming up, and I grew up in probably three of the toughest districts in the entire city, North Lawndale, Inglewood, and Austin. But I'm sitting here as a product of those three neighborhoods because I had that village. You know, we had gangs when I was coming up, we had drugs and the whole 9 yards, but what we had was the village that wrapped their arms around us. And if you were an athlete, if you were going to school, if you were just somebody that was in a strong family, the gang stayed away from you. Those very same people that kept me away from the gangs and trouble are now the very same people that are embracing these young kids and drawing them into the gangs and the trouble. So we have to just stand up and stop looking for this magic bullet to come out of the sky that's going to save our neighborhoods and save our communities. We have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, we can be the solution to what's going on here. So it starts with us.
Deputy, I'm just wondering, how do we make sure that police are part of that village, that the people in the community see them as a friend and not a foe or someone to mistrust?
It comes from being transparent. I think transparency is the start. And secondly, having them come in and partner with us, letting them know what it is that we do. And again, we had a great year last year as far as crime statistics go, but we couldn't have achieved what we achieved without the community involvement. I mean, there are communities in this city that have no crime where everybody wants to talk and point to Inglewood. We have to sit back and ask ourselves, why is that? And that's because those communities are involved. They work hand in hand with the police, and they're not afraid to pick up the telephone. If they see something, say something.
Yes, sir.
We have an inherent problem in our communities where we want to just bury our heads in the sand and pretend like we're ostriches. I mean, everybody in the neighborhood knows who the bad guys are. And almost to a person, we know who are pulling the triggers, who the killers are, in the whole 9 yards. But when we come out and we try to talk to these people, you can have 40 people that were standing around and somebody gets shot. Nobody sees anything. How is that possible? But it comes with trust, too.
Sure.
And that was going to be my second segue. Law enforcement has to repair some bridges that have been torn down historically and build that trust from not just the African American communities, but communities of color, to let them know that they can work with us and we will assist them in trying to get their communities where they need to be. So repair those bridges, build that trust, bring them in to see what it is that we're doing, and I think that'll go a long way with helping stem some of this violence.
Excellent. We didn't get a chance to touch on this much, Robin, in questions, but it drives right to the issue of incarceration. This is a mother, obviously, in the audience, and she says, as a mother of a son murdered by a young man with a history of incarceration and probation, what is being done to address the revolving door of offenders? State's Attorney, can you maybe talk about that in terms of prosecution?
Well, I think what I talked about earlier is that when it comes certainly to gun laws, they need to be stronger. So that revolving door isn't, spinning around so fast. So we keep the people who are creating all the violence out on the streets incarcerated a little longer, because if they're inside, they're not killing anybody outside.
Mike,
Or
is it working?
Oh, sorry. I think, when it comes to sentencing, it's up to the judge. And, we can stand up there till we're blue in the face and ask for a significant amount of time, but it's up to the judge. So are we disappointed sometimes in the sentences we get? Absolutely. And that contributes to the fact that maybe someone's on probation when they shouldn't be. Are they necessarily sending us back something better? No, probably not. But are the streets a little safer? I think they are. At least that person is being deterred from killing anybody else or shooting anybody else.
For that period of time.
And
Can I add to that? It's all about our priorities. Al mentioned it, and this is one of our mantras. It's not about filling up the jails. It's about putting the right people in jail. Well, the laws have to reflect that. I think the number is 26% of the people in Cook County are in jail for narcotics offenses, while 5% are in for gun offenses. Now, you can make the argument both ways that narcotics is killing the community just as quickly as guns. However, gun violence is something that we can do something about very, very quickly. It's not okay to sell drugs. It's not okay to use drugs. But certainly on the west side, and I know there's people here from the west side, the narcotics problem drives the violence on the west side. We are trying to make the drug dealers understand that when there's violence, we were going to come down on them and shut down your operation for a week, 2 weeks, as long as we could keep resources there. And if they're really businessmen, they will figure out that violence is bad for business. Now, after that, we'll go after the narcotics business. So it's about priorities, and this is the whole issue of incarceration, quite frankly. It's about putting the right people in jail. It's not about putting everybody in jail. As a matter of fact, we put 7,000 less people in jail last year with a 20% reduction in crime.
And still Cook County Jail is bursting at this.
Over 10,000.
I know, and when we pointed out that wasn't necessarily us because we made less arrests,
right.
A lot of people didn't believe it.
Okay, it could be a whole other subject in terms of what happens when people go to jail and how to that to not be the revolving door so that they just become better criminals or more hardened.
While they're in prison, they got to get involved with whatever the prison's offering, which a lot of times is just routine stuff. And so
redemptive, is that what you're saying?
You got to have redemption. You got to have, and that's where the faith base comes in, and when they do the prison ministries and they go in and they bring their programs into the prison, but there needs to be a little more, and that's where our organization NEC, that's what we do in state prisons in Pennsylvania and Delaware, is that we actually when we go into prison, they know us from being in prison when we was in prison, and the transformation and the redemption part. To the mother that lost her child down there, I work with Dorothy Spite in Philadelphia called Mothers in Charge. She lost her son and she became proactive in working with the other mothers that lost their children, and they get grouped up and they go into the prison with the redemption.
We don't want to keep you guys here too long. We know you can't wait to get outside in that lovely weather. And this is about guns. And there are two questions kind of combined. One person wants to know what kind of strategy we use to get it across to the average citizen that where the gun came from in every incident, and still be able to prosecute. In other words, not mess up the case, I guess. This is how can we get it across to the average citizen where the gun came from in every incident and still prosecute? The other question is, why can't we close Chuck's gun shop? Father Pfleger, Jesse Jackson, the Pope himself can't close Chuck's. Why is that? I don't know if it's probably people to tell you where the gun came from. The president comes up with the next president, they'll talk. It's been in everybody's news.
Well, I think there is a problem, tracking guns. There is a problem tracking guns, and there is a problem with people telling us where the gun came from. Absolutely, and that's going to frustrate any prosecution. We talk a lot about the no snitch. I mean, it's out there. People don't want to get involved. People don't want to snitch on their buddies. They don't even, or their neighbor. So it makes it more difficult.
So if you do prosecute for somebody who committed a crime with a gun, can you then also prosecute?
Well, that's another piece of legislation that we try to. Well, it finally got passed last year. Lost and stolen. And what that law does is try to hold accountable those people who may, in fact, Gary mentioned this earlier, have a valid FOID card. They go out and they legally buy a few guns, but then they're selling them on the street to the gang members. There's really no accountability for those people, and that's what we finally were able to get a law passed last year, to hold them responsible, to get to those straw buyers. Those are the people who are buying them, but then they're selling them right back out on the street.
Superintendent McCarthy, even if we have what you consider to be common sense gun laws here in Chicago, wouldn't they just bring them in from other places where the gun laws are less stringent?
Yeah, but at the same time, let's close our front door, and then we worry about our back door. Cook County provides 40% of the guns that we recover here in the city of Chicago. And just one quick anecdote to support what the state's attorney just said. In March of 2012, we had a police officer by the name of Del Pearson who was shot, almost died. His vest deflected one bullet. A second bullet entered below the vest and nicked his aorta. And by the grace of God and some great doctoring, he survived. The firearm that shot Del Pearson had one recorded transaction on it. It was purchased in Blue Island, Illinois in 1973 by a 53-year-old woman who died in Little Rock, Arkansas in 2006. So you want to know why we can't figure out where the guns come from? Because there's no mechanism, there's no requirement to make the accountability, facilitate the accountability.
This is for J. Dean. Weren't there more mentoring programs offered in the Chicago Public Schools? Why aren't there?
Resources would be the first answer. We are on limited resources, but that's not going to stop us. And so what we're trying to do, and someone mentioned it earlier, evidence-based programming. We've found a evidence-based mentoring process called BAM, Becoming a Man. The president was in Chicago. His wife was also in Chicago a separate time, and they visited these Becoming a Man sessions. These are evidence-based programs which have shown violence to be reduced among the participants by 50%. What we recently found also was that when you combine that with tutoring, a lot of our high-risk students are way behind in their math and English skills. When you combine that mentoring, that BAM program, with a matched tutoring program, they can catch up. Let's say they're behind by 3 years in math. they can catch up in 1 year.
Wow.
When you combine those two. And here's the thing, the tutoring program is about $3,000 a year per kid, which if you really look at a mentoring program, that's a really good deal. And to get the kind of results that they see, evidence-based. Evidence-based means scientifically proven to work. And so it's scalable at that extent. So one of the things we're doing right now, University of Chicago Crime Lab is one of the groups that helped us with that program. They just got a big $1 million grant yesterday from the MacArthur Foundation. It's those kind of resources we're constantly shipping out or dialing for dollars, just trying to get support behind those programs. Pastor Harris talked about building that capacity in the community. We want to hire people from the communities that they serve to be those mentors, train them in that capacity. That is really where the strategy is going. We believe it works. The kids who are in it love it. And we actually just brought one of them with us out to D.C. To an anti-violence summit. And he got up in front of a huge audience. And he was so proud to talk about what he was doing before the program and after the program. And now he's on his way. He's entrepreneurial. He wants to start his own business. He's come a long way.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be about it. Was this time well served? Okay. Let's give a hand to our panel. Okay, let's give a hand to our panel. There is a last very poignant question, and I'm going to ask Chief Dixon and local chapter president Chief Williams to come up and address this. And the question is pretty simple, and that is, what's next? And so, Chief, if you and Chief Williams would come up.
I tell you, we all go to a lot of meetings, we all go to a lot of these discussions, and we talk about it. Now it's time to be about it. One of the things that we're going to do from Noble's perspective is we're going to gather all the information, and for those who don't know, we've been here all weekend sitting down. We had a roundtable discussion, and a lot of these same issues came up, and some of the solutions came up to some of these issues. And so we're going to gather all this information. The information will be given to us from this discussion as well, and we're going to put it together, sort of a white paper to look at how to introduce some of these things for solutions to these problems. And I realize, a lot of times, let me say a couple things. I'm going to take some privilege. Where's Ron? You gone? Ron, if you don't mind coming up. One of the things I want to say to the community, here, one of the things we got to realize, and it's been hinted upon in the panel, crime goes where we allow it to go. And we need to understand that if you got certain neighborhoods, you know why you don't have the crime there? Because those folks don't allow it to go there. They create the partnerships, they create the relationships, they create the communications that it takes to make sure it's not within those communities. We, at some point, and this is, where people sometimes don't want to say, but we got to stop making excuses and start making solutions. We got to stop saying, oh, the police ain't helping me, oh, this grant ran out. We got to start as a community saying, you know what, we're going to take care of this, because when I came along, it wasn't no grants. It wasn't, well, these things didn't exist. What existed was, community took care of community. Right. They did not allow certain things to happen. If little Johnny was on the corner, they picked up the phone and called the police and would stand out there, and they know who called the police. They know Miss Murray on that corner called the police. They know Miss Murray said, I ain't having that on my block. And we got to get back to some of those basic, simple things. All the money, all the police, you don't want the police on every corner. Nobody wants the police on every corner. We want community involvement in every house. And that's how we go to start solving these problems. And that's the way we start doing that. It was a quote said earlier today, and I had Dr. Alvarez write this down for me. It says, the heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. And I'm going to leave you with this, and then I'm going to let Ron say something. But, where do you want to stop the problem? Do you want to stop it in the high chair when the person's young, or do you want to wait until they get to that electric chair? And I'm going to leave you with that, and you decide as a community, as a neighborhood. These folks up here work and they work and they drive, but they need you behind them. They need you beside them. They need you with them. When they go into those legislative sessions, they need a community group behind them saying, you know what, y'all gonna do this. That's how we get things done. As long as we sit here and talk about it and not take those actions and not put on those boots on the ground, as was mentioned earlier, we're gonna be doing this 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and it'll be a continuous process. That's enough to say about me.
Good afternoon. My name is Ron Davis. I'm the director of the COPS Office for the United States Department of Justice. Your superintendent alluded to that I have a checkbook, so it's not a very big one, but it's going to be one that's going to be used.
So you can stay at the mic for a little
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start with a comment the president made during his recent State of the Union address when he talked about this being a year of action. And I think it goes to what the community is saying is it's pretty much time to stop relitigating things that we already know the answers to. We know that there's problems. We know we need to respond to them. We know that it's very complex. It was very informative for me to listen to the experts on the panel, very passionate, very informed. So we know there's no simple solutions. Let me tell you the role that the president has made sure that the federal government is going to do, especially the COPS office. So as we start putting our grants money out this year, we're going to focus heavy on the issue of gun violence and equally heavy on the issue of community trust. Because I believe, and I know the president believes, that you cannot address gun violence unless you have trust between the community and the police department. It was alluded to with one of your questions about that. So we're going to invest very heavily on how do we strengthen the relationship between the police department and all of our communities, especially communities of color, for young men of color. As I shared with groups time and time again, and recently with the Senate hearing, is I've been a cop for over 28 years. Now I'm a federal political appointee. And even after 28 years of service, I have a 16-year-old son. And I know that before my son can drive my car, there's certain things I'm gonna have to teach him. I'm gonna have to teach him what areas to go to, what not to go to, but I'm also have to teach him what to do when stopped by the police. And so we have to resolve all of those issues to get to it. Where we talk about reentry, we're not talking about prisoners or inmates, we're talking about our residents. They came from us, they're coming back home. No matter how many mandatory minimums we get, very few are going to stay in there forever. So what do we do while they're in there? What do we do when we come back? You'll see a very strong focus from my office on the issue of reentry, and I believe police have a significant role to play, not just incarcerating, but in healing. The doctor who left mentioned in charge of public health is we need to start looking at violence as a disease. It spreads like a disease. It's a bloodborne pathogen. It's based on risk behavior, and people are exposed. Right now, we have community members exposed to violence and don't even know it. No different than if they were still exposed to some disease. So we need to find those type of solutions. The Attorney General last year announced a Smart on Crime initiative. And I think that's going to be the focus, and I'll be talking about this tomorrow with my noble brothers and sisters at the conference. And it's about making us smarter, more efficient, and also fairer. It's talking about looking at sentencing reform. It's the idea of looking at reentry. You know, the president talked about now is the time on gun violence, which I think the superintendent hit, about whether it's assault weapons, expended magazines, universal checks. So we need to come up with comprehensive solutions, and you'll see from the COPS office, we'll put a lot of money out in the field to look at the issues of community trust, look at the issues of gang violence, look at the issue of national security, and also look at the issue of community policing as a core strategy. Not a program, not a side benefit, not just simply going to a meeting, but how do we use it to actually reduce crime and violence in all of our communities? And I say that from someone who spent 20 years in Oakland as a police officer and commander, to 8 years in a community called East Palo Alto, which is much smaller than Chicago by far, but very similar. And for one who's grown up in neighborhoods in Philadelphia the rest of all of his life, that where I believe the solutions, quite frankly, are at this table and in the audience. And so the role of the federal government, from my perspective, is not to tell Chicago how to do it, not to tell any community how to do it, but to use the grant to create venues for innovation, creativity, to support that, and where we find things are working, to replicate it around this country so that from East Palo Alto to Chicago to Camden to LAPD, that we can find ways to strengthen the relationship between the police and young men of color, and that would be the beginning of making our community strong, healthy, and safe. So I'm very much looking forward to, I've known your superintendent for a long time. I haven't seen him in a couple of months, so it's good to see you, Gary. And I know a few other panel members, former superintendents, good to see you. And it was a very good venue, so I look forward to working with Chicago. Thank you.
Okay, we certainly want to respect your time, but I just want to make it clear that this was not a Chicago Police Department town hall. This was not a state's attorney's town hall. This is the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement across the entire country coming to Chicago, having discussions, looking for solutions, and letting you know through the Chicago chapter, one of the 50-plus chapters that they have across the country, how you could partner with Noble and the Chicago Police Department and the State's Attorney's Office and community-based organization and CAPS and the community. That's why Noble is here this weekend. And as the president of the Chicago chapter, we are facilitating this particular town hall, and we appreciate you being here, but we want to make it clear. It's Noble who is coming here to try to get input from the community so that we could help to provide solutions. And I think when we bring Director Davis here, when we have chiefs of police from all across the country coming in here to have a discussion and to see what we're doing here and see what it is that they could take back to their respective agencies and what they could help us do here to improve things. That's why we are here today. And we did not walk in this room with the expectation that we will walk out with answers and answer all of the problems that you have today. So I just want to say that, again, I want to respect your time. So I want to start by saying how much I appreciate Ms. Robinson here, Vance Henry. I think they did an outstanding job as moderators. I want to thank again the panelists here. You know, it's Friday evening in Chicago. A lot of people, you know, be wrapping it up at 4 o'clock, and all of them have taken time out of their busy schedule to stay here, and Noble is not paying them. So it's oh, you thought you were getting paid? No. So that is greatly appreciated. So I give them a hand as well. But the biggest hand I give to the community who came out to hear what we're trying to saying, and to know more about the Chicago chapter of Noble, where we hope to be able to work with you through CAPS, through our clergy. And I know we're going to be talking about some of the things that come out of the white paper that comes from this. I'll be working with the mayor's office and so forth. So we hope to be able to find some solutions for you as we go forward. So I also want to take a couple of liberties. I want to ask the executive board of National Noble to stand. I know we put the information up there, but could I have the executive board please stand just of Noble? I just want to recognize you all. Thank you. And so to get a lot of what we need to get done, we are going to have to continue in these partnerships. So we talk about Director Davis. We talk about Tracy from Motorola supporting us. Thank you so much for that. But I got to tell you that this doesn't happen unless you have a lot of support. And so when the national president asked, could we work on this? Could we try to put this together? I asked the superintendent, could we use his room? Could we use a whole lot of things? And his response to me was, Gene, whatever you want is yours. Whatever you need, you can get it done. And so I want to say thank you for allowing us to be here.